single dad, stayed to help a sick woman at the bus stop. She whispered, "Tell no one. I'm the CEO." The wind howled down the empty street like it had something to say. Jack Miller adjusted the fraying scarf around his neck and pulled his daughter's hood up higher over her tiny ears. Sophie, only 9, leaned into him half asleep, her fingers wrapped around his calloused hand as they stood under the flickering bus stop light. "Is the bus really coming, Dad?" She mumbled, her breath fogging the cold air. "Yeah, sweetheart. Might be late, but it's coming." Jack gave her hand a gentle squeeze, hoping she couldn't hear the doubt in his voice. The night had dropped into the kind of cold that bit through denim and sank into bone. The city buses were unreliable at this hour, especially near the industrial edge of town. It was nearly midnight. Jack had just finished a double shift fixing warehouse conveyor belts. His boots were soaked through from the snowmelt inside the factory, and his body screamed for rest. But Sophie had insisted on coming to pick him up tonight. It was her way of getting more time with him, and he couldn't say no to her quiet eyes. Then, from the far end of the bench came a sound. A cough. Weak. Then another. Jack turned, barely catching sight of a figure hunched over at the other end of the bus shelter, someone he hadn't noticed before. A woman sat curled in on herself, shivering under the thin fabric of what looked like a silk blouse and slacks. No coat, no gloves. Her long, dark hair clung damply to her cheeks. From her high heels, kicked halfway off to the dried blood at her temple, everything about her screamed wrong place, wrong time. Jack's instincts kicked in. He stepped toward her, cautiously tugging Sophie to his side. "Ma'am," he asked. "You okay?" No answer. Only a slow, shaking breath. Jack bent down, catching the woman's face under the flickering light. Her skin was pale damp with sweat despite the cold. He reached out and gently touched her forehead. Burning. "She's got a fever," he muttered. Then louder. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and unfocused. She looked at him. Really looked at him for one fleeting second. And then, almost inaudibly, she whispered, "Tell no one. I'm the CEO." Jack blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" But her eyes had already closed again. "Dad," Sophie whispered beside him, tugging his sleeve. "She's not okay." Jack exhaled sharply, glancing up and down the deserted street. No cars, no taxis, no buses. The nearest hospital was over 30 minutes away on foot, and he wasn't about to leave this woman freezing here. "Okay," he said, making a decision. "Help me with her." Together, he and Sophie managed to support the woman, her weight surprisingly slight against his shoulder. She groaned softly but didn't resist. Her breath was shallow-labored. Jack took off his coat and wrapped it around her, gritting his teeth against the cold. "Hang on, lady. We're not letting you freeze to death." Jack's apartment wasn't much. A second-floor walk-up above an old laundromat with peeling linoleum and a heating system that rattled like it had asthma. But it was warm and clean and more than this stranger had at that moment. He laid her gently on the worn couch while Sophie fetched a blanket from the hall closet. Jack knelt beside the woman, brushing damp strands of hair from her cheek. He noticed now that her earrings' tiny, tasteful diamonds had been ripped, one missing a bit of dried blood at the lobe. This wasn't just a bad night out. Something had happened. Sophie returned with the blanket and tucked it carefully around the woman's shoulders, her small hands trembling. "Is she gonna die?" she whispered. Jack looked at his daughter. So serious. Too old for her age. "No," he said firmly. "Not on my watch." He went to the kitchen and returned with a cold compress. As he placed it on the woman's forehead, she stirred. "Water," she croaked. Jack helped her sit up and held a glass to her lips. She drank greedily, coughing after the first few sips. "Where am I?" she asked hoarsely. "Safe," Jack replied. "My apartment. You were at the bus stop." Freezing. She looked at him, then really looked. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. But there was something fragile there, too. Something cracked beneath the surface. "I didn't mean to end up there," she murmured. "I just—" walked. I didn't want them to find me. Who, Jack asked, his voice low. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned back into the couch cushions, exhaling a shaky breath. Thank you, she said after a long pause. But, please, don't tell anyone I was here, or who I am. Jack studied her, even disheveled her posture, her words. Tell no one I'm the CEO. They didn't come from someone ordinary. There was power in her somewhere under the bruises and the heat of fever. Power and fear. I don't even know your name, he said. She hesitated. You don't need to, she replied. Jack sighed. All right, then I guess I'll just call you Mystery. That almost got a smile. Almost. Sophie curled up nearby, her head on a pillow, fighting sleep. Jack sat in the armchair across from them, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall under the old wool blanket. He didn't know who she was, or why she was running, but something told him. This night, this moment was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. And outside, under the broken street lamp, the bus never came. By morning, the storm had passed, but the cold lingered in the bones of the city. The heat from the old radiator ticked and clanked, barely keeping pace with the chill seeping through the window panes. Jack stood at the stove, stirring a pot of instant oatmeal, glancing every so often at the woman still sleeping on his couch. Sophie sat at the small kitchen table, swinging her legs, her hair a mess of tangles and her cheeks pink from the cold bathroom tiles. She cradled her favorite chipped mug, half full of hot chocolate. "Dad," she whispered, "do you think she's a real CEO?" Jack poured the oatmeal into two mismatched bowls. "I don't know, Bug. I've met some corporate types. They don't usually pass out on bus benches." Sophie wrinkled her nose. She looked scared last night, like she was hiding. Jack nodded, but said nothing. The woman's whisper still echoed in his mind. "Tell no one I'm the CEO." The plea in her voice hadn't sounded like pride, it had sounded like desperation. He walked over and gently knelt beside her. She looked more peaceful in daylight, though her skin still held a faint flush. Her hair framed her face like she'd once paid good money for it, but now it was matted strands stuck to her forehead with sweat. As if sensing him, her eyelids fluttered open. "Good morning," Jack said quietly. She sat up fast, blinking at her surroundings. Her breath caught as her gaze darted from the mismatched furniture to the unfamiliar ceiling. "Where you're safe," he said quickly, hands raised in reassurance. "This is my place. You passed out last night. It was freezing out. I didn't think twice." She exhaled shakily and nodded. "I remember. You and your daughter. Sophie." He smiled slightly. "She's got a better bedside manner than I do." The woman blinked, and for a moment something in her expression softened. Jack handed her a glass of water. "You had a fever. It's broken now, but you still look like you got hit by a train. You need rest." "I can't stay," she said immediately. "I've already been here too long." Jack didn't argue. He wasn't about to hold her hostage, but he gestured toward her clothes, still damp and clinging, and added, "At least wait until your pants stop freezing to your legs." She glanced down and cracked the faintest smile. "I'm Jack, by the way," he said. "Not sure if I mentioned that." She hesitated. "Claire." He raised an eyebrow. "That your real name?" Claire met his eyes steady now and replied, "For today it is." Jack gave a slow nod. "Fair enough." Sophie patted over, carrying a steaming mug carefully in both hands. "I made you tea. It's peppermint. Daddy says it helps when you're sick." Claire blinked at her, caught off guard. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the mug. Her hands trembled slightly. "You don't have to tell us anything," Jack said after a moment. "But you should eat something before you go." Claire looked like she wanted to refuse, but the smell of oatmeal, warm and sweet, tugged at something in her. She nodded faintly, and Jack motioned to the table. They ate mostly in silence, Claire, cautious Sophie, chattering a little about school and her drawings, blissfully unaware of the tension hanging in the air. Jack watched Claire out of the corner of his eye. She ate slowly with the delicate grace of someone used to fine meals but too hungry to care about decorum. She finally pushed her bowl away and stood wobbling a little. Jack was at her side in a second. "You sure you're up for walking?" he asked. Claire straightened. "I don't have much of a choice." "Is someone looking for you?" he asked gently. "Because you don't look like you were just out for a jog." She flinched at the question. Jack raised his hands again. "Okay, none of my business. I get it. But let me help, even just a ride somewhere." Claire hesitated for a long beat, then shook her head. "No. If I show up anywhere I'm expected, they'll bury me in meetings and cameras and a PR cleanup crew before I can breathe." Jack frowned. "Sounds like you're not just a CEO. Sounds like you're escaping something." Her lips pressed into a line. "I made some enemies. Trusted the wrong people. Now they think I'm the problem." She looked away. "And maybe I am." Jack saw the tightness in her jaw, the way she stared at the floor like it might swallow her. There was pain in her, deep and personal. He knew that look he'd worn it himself the day they lowered his wife's casket into the ground. "Look," he said, keeping his voice level, "you don't owe me anything. But people like you don't just end up at a bus stop in a silk blouse unless they've hit a wall hard. If you need somewhere to be invisible for a while, this place ain't glamorous, but it's quiet, and we don't ask many questions." Claire's eyes met his, something unreadable flickering behind them. She seemed to be measuring him not just his words, but his intent. He let her see that he meant every word. Sophie tugged Claire's sleeve. "You can use my blanket if you want. It's really soft." Claire looked down at her, blinking fast. Her voice cracked slightly when she said, "That's very kind of you." Jack didn't press her again. He just gave her space and brought out a pair of his late wife's sweatpants and a hoodie from the hall closet. "They'll be big," he said, setting them on the couch, "but warm. There's a towel in the bathroom if you want to freshen up." She paused at the threshold, then turned back. "Why are you doing this?" Jack met her gaze. "Because last winter a guy named Eli gave me a ride when my car broke down in a snowstorm. Said, we're all just one bad night from needing each other." I never forgot that. Claire held his eyes for a long time, then nodded once quietly, accepting something neither of them had words for yet. And as the bathroom door clicked shut behind her, Jack leaned against the kitchen counter, exhaled deeply, and muttered under his breath, "Just one bad night." He had no idea how true those words were about to become. It was nearly noon by the time Claire stepped out of the bathroom wearing Jack's oversized hoodie and sweatpants. Her damp hair was combed back and she looked marginally less ghostly, though her eyes still held a wariness that didn't match the softness of the clothes she wore. The hoodie swallowed her slender frame, but somehow it suited her, a woman stripped of her armor, no longer surrounded by glass walls and assistants, just human for once. Sophie sat on the floor by the coffee table drawing, with markers, legs crossed beneath her like a pretzel. She looked up with a wide smile. "You look better," the girl chirped, "less like a ghost." Claire let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," Sophie assured her, turning back to her drawing. "I'm making a map of where I'd live if I had a lot of money. It has trees and a goat farm and a candy store that gives out free jelly beans every Wednesday." Claire walked slowly to the couch and sat watching her. Jack appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He caught the sight of Claire settled in the slightest flicker of relief passing over his face. "Soup's on," he said. "Well, if you count canned tomato and grilled cheese as soup." "I count it as a miracle," Claire said, and she meant it. They sat around the tiny fold-out table, knees nearly touching, eating from chipped bowls. Claire ate slowly again, and Jack didn't push her to talk, though the questions clawed at him. It was Sophie who broke the silence. "You don't look like the people Dad used to work for." Jack stiffened just slightly. Claire looked at him, intrigued. "What kind of work?" Engineering, Jack said simply. "Maintenance stuff. Industrial systems. Did 15 years in a plant that made parts for shipping lines." "Got fired?" Claire asked, not judgmentally, but matter of fact. He nodded. Filed a report when a supervisor cut corners on safety inspections. 2 weeks later, they restructured. He sipped his soup. The guy I reported ended up with my job. Go figure. Claire's grip on her spoon tightened. Sounds about right. Big company, she asked after a pause. Jack glanced at her suspicious for the first time. Yeah, one of the Hartwell subsidiaries. Why? Claire lowered her eyes to her bowl. No reason. He watched her, something shifting behind his gaze. You said your name's Claire. Yes, she said, not meeting his eyes. You also said you're a CEO? I did. But there's no Claire listed among the top execs at Hartwell or any of the majors, Jack added evenly. Sophie blinked between them. Is this like a riddle? Claire set her spoon down slowly. No. This is the part where you start putting things together. Jack leaned back in his chair. Go on. I wasn't lying, Claire said, voice lower now. I just didn't want to be found. Evelyn Claire Hart. That's my full name, legally, but everyone knows me as Evelyn Hart. Jack sat in stunned silence. You're Evelyn Hart, he said slowly, of Hartwell International. She nodded. Yes, and I left. He stared at her soup, forgotten. You left your company, I disappeared, she clarified. Or tried to. The board wants me out. They've been maneuvering for months. Public scandal over something my brother did, they pinned it on me. I got tired of spinning half-truths and smiling through blood. But why here, he asked. Why not a hotel, a lawyer, a friend? Because they'd find me. Because I needed. She paused. I needed a place where nobody expected me to be human. Sophie had gone quiet. She looked between them again and softly asked, But you are human. You just needed help like anybody. Claire blinked at her hard. Then she whispered, You're right. I just forgot what it felt like to be helped. Jack exhaled, rubbing his temples. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Claire replied. You helped me before you knew who I was. That's all I needed. There was a long pause. Jack finally stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the alley below, the slush melting in patches under a gray sky. His reflection in the glass looked tired, older than his years. You know what's funny, he said quietly. I spent years thinking people like you only saw people like me when you needed something. Claire stood too moving next to him. And now I'm still not sure, he admitted. She looked at his reflection beside hers. Then let me show you. From her pocket, she pulled out a card. Sleek, minimal black with gold trim. Jack didn't take it. I'm not looking for favors, he said. This isn't a favor, Claire replied. It's a thank you, and maybe a way to level the field. I'll be gone tonight. I just didn't want to leave without giving you something more than a ghost story. Sophie got up and walked over. She took Claire's hand and placed a folded piece of paper in it. It's our map, she said shyly. In case you ever want to find us again. Claire opened it. Crayon drawings of trees, goats, and jelly bean stores filled the page. But in the center she had drawn 3 stick figures under a roof, one tall, one little, and one with long hair and a tiny crown. Claire laughed, choked, and wiped at her eyes. I'll keep it, she said. That night, Claire Evelyn disappeared from their lives as quickly as she had arrived. No note, no goodbye, just a folded blanket, a cup cleaned and placed back where it had been, and Sophie's map missing from the table. But neither Jack nor Sophie would forget her. Not the way she looked when she finally smiled, not the way she stood by the window stripped of everything but her humanity. And somewhere in the city, under a different name, Evelyn Hart was beginning to remember who she was when she wasn't a CEO. Someone who mattered, to someone who never even knew her name. Jack found the silence that followed Evelyn's departure heavier than he'd expected. For 3 nights he came home to a quiet apartment, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the void she'd left behind. Her name, Evelyn Hart, kept circling his mind like a song he couldn't shake. CEO of Hartwell International. A ghost at his bus stop. A woman who had asked not to be known. but Sophie missed her most. "Do you think she's safe?" she asked one evening while coloring at the coffee table. "I hope so," Jack said gently. "She didn't look like someone who had anyone," Sophie murmured almost to herself. Jack paused at the kitchen sink, the sponge frozen mid-scrub. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jack pulled out the folded newspaper Mrs. Delaney had slipped under his door that morning, like she always did when she found something interesting. On the front page, a headline stretched across the top in bold, "CEO Evelyn Hart returns amid internal turmoil at Hartwell." A photo below it showed Evelyn exiting a building flanked by security, her face pale but composed. There was no smile, just the tight professional expression he hadn't seen on her during her time in his home. He traced her image with his eyes. She looked nothing like the woman in the oversized hoodie sipping peppermint tea beside Sophie. She looked armored. Jack folded the paper carefully and slid it back under a stack of mail. The woman he'd met who had sat barefoot on his couch and asked for nothing but silence was still in there somewhere. He just didn't know if the world she'd returned to would let her stay. A week later, Jack was finishing a late-night repair job at a small auto shop across town when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered hesitantly. "Yeah." A familiar voice spoke on the other end. "You still eat grilled cheese?" Jack blinked. "Evelyn." There was a small laugh. "Only person I know who uses 4 slices of bread for 2 sandwiches." His chest tightened. "You okay?" "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I could use a quiet place for 15 minutes. Not to run, just to breathe." Jack looked at his tool bag, the grease on his hands, the work orders stacked on the desk. 15 minutes, he said. "I'll meet you halfway." They met at a closed-down diner on the edge of downtown. The neon sign still flickered open, out of habit though the windows were dark. Evelyn leaned against the hood of a parked sedan, arms folded across a wool coat that screamed money but didn't quite hide the fatigue in her eyes. She looked better, stronger, but also more brittle, as if each decision in the past week had cost her a piece of herself. "I didn't think you'd come," she said as he approached. "I didn't think you'd call," he replied. They stood in silence for a few beats. The air was crisp, the city around them buzzing softly with late-night life. "I've been back 8 days," she said, "and every hour someone's asking for a decision, an explanation, or a signature. You're the CEO, Jack said. That's the job, right?" She looked at him. "It used to be. Before I became the distraction." He said nothing. She went on. "They want me out. Not officially, just quietly. A graceful exit. I came back to clean up the mess. But I think the mess is me now. That what they told you, that's what they show me. Every sideways glance, every closed-door meeting I'm not invited to anymore." She ran a hand through her hair. "I stood in a room full of people I once led, and not one of them asked if I was okay." Jack leaned back against a nearby bench. "And why would they? You're not supposed to be human. You're a brand." She smiled faintly. "Exactly." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then why'd you come back?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "Because a little girl gave me a map. And I realized I didn't want to disappear. I wanted to find my way back." Jack swallowed hard. "She still has that map on her wall," he said. "Said if she hangs it up, you might come looking." Evelyn's lips trembled slightly. "She believed in me before I did." There was a beat of silence before Jack added, "You don't have to let them win. What if I don't have a choice?" "You always do," he said. "Even if it's just choosing who you let see the real you." Evelyn exhaled long and slow. "It's hard to remember who that is. I spent so long building the image that I forgot the person underneath." Jack tilted his head. "I didn't." She looked up. "You're the woman who apologized for waking Sophie, who thanked me for soup, who said please when she asked for help even when she was barely standing." He paused. "That's not someone I forget." Evelyn looked down, blinking quickly. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked, her voice raw. I'm not easy." "Because I've been where you are," he said. "Different stage, same script. Everyone wants something until you're no longer useful." She studied him like she was seeing him again for the first time. "I don't want to be another powerful person who walks into someone's life and leaves it worse," she whispered. Jack smiled, small and sad. "You already didn't." They stood in silence again, the cold beginning to seep into their bones. Evelyn took a slow breath. "Would it be okay if I stopped by tomorrow? Just to say hi to Sophie. Maybe bring her some jelly beans." Jack gave a quiet laugh. "She'd never forgive me if I said no." Evelyn nodded, her voice soft. "Good." She turned to go, but paused. "Jack, yeah, I don't know where this is going, but thank you for seeing me." Jack met her eyes steady. "That's what we do here." She smiled, really smiled for the first time in days. And under the quiet street lamp it was clear no matter what world she belonged to by title, this was the world where she had finally been seen, not as a CEO but as a person. The apartment felt warmer that morning, though the heater hadn't changed a thing. Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes while Sophie decorated the table with paper flowers she had cut out before school. "She's coming today, right?" she asked, balancing on a chair to place a drawing above her place setting. He glanced at the clock. She said she'd stop by. Sophie grinned, holding up a drawing of 3 stick figures under a sun with long yellow rays. "I made us all look happy." Jack smiled, but said nothing. He didn't want to set expectations. The truth was, he didn't know if Evelyn would actually come. A part of him hoped she would. Another part prepared to explain to Sophie gently why some people made promises they couldn't keep. But at exactly 10:06, a soft knock echoed from the door. Sophie beat him to it, flinging it open like a spring breeze. Evelyn stood there in a long gray coat, holding a modest paper bag and a hesitant smile. She looked beautiful not in the polished press conference kind of way, but in the quiet way someone looks when they're where they want to be. "Hi," she said. "I come bearing jelly beans." Sophie gasped with delight and threw her arms around her. Evelyn laughed genuinely and hugged her back. "I missed you too, kiddo." Jack watched from the kitchen, his arms crossed but relaxed. She met his gaze and nodded, grateful, steady. Breakfast was a mix of clumsy pancakes, syrup-stained drawings, and Evelyn's stories told just vaguely enough to protect her world, but warmly enough to let them in. Sophie chattered, bouncing between topics with 9-year-old velocity. Evelyn followed her pace effortlessly as if she had been there all along. Jack noticed how easily she fit, how natural it felt having her back in the room. After breakfast, Evelyn stood by the window cradling a cup of coffee. Sophie had gone to change into her school clothes, humming in the bedroom. "You made this feel like home," Evelyn said softly, not looking at him. Jack leaned against the wall. "You made it easy to let you in." She smiled faintly, then turned toward him. "I didn't just come to bring jelly beans." Jack waited. Evelyn took a deep breath, the kind you take when you know something good is about to end. "I have to leave town." Jack's posture stiffened. "When?" "This afternoon." His voice was even, but the words caught. "Why, there's a meeting in Chicago with the board. They're offering me a deal control over a new foundation branch if I agree to step down quietly from corporate leadership." Jack narrowed his eyes. "And you're considering it?" Evelyn nodded. "It's the only way I can do something good with the resources I have, without being buried by their games." He studied her. "You sure this is what you want? Or is this just the best way to stop the bleeding?" "I don't know anymore," she said honestly. "All I know is I'm tired of pretending, and I want to build something that matters, Jack. Not just numbers and headlines. Something real." Jack walked over and stood beside her. "Then do it, but not because they told you to. Do it because it feels right." She looked up at him, her eyes uncertain. "I'm scared." He nodded slowly. "That means you still care." They stood quietly, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, but close enough to feel it. From the bedroom, Sophie called, "I'm ready." Evelyn glanced at the clock. "I'll walk with you." Jack picked up Sophie's backpack. Evelyn knelt down and helped the girl zip her jacket. On the sidewalk outside, Sophie looked up at Evelyn. "Are you coming back again?" Evelyn hesitated, then crouched down and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind Sophie's ear. "I hope so," she whispered. "But if I don't, you were the best thing that happened to me this year." Sophie frowned. "Why wouldn't you come back?" Evelyn gave a small smile. "Because grown-ups sometimes take a while to figure themselves out. But you helped me start." Sophie nodded solemnly like a small sage. "Okay, but don't take too long. Our treehouse plans need 3 people." Evelyn laughed through the ache in her chest. After Sophie climbed onto the school bus, Jack and Evelyn stood in the street, the hum of city life returning around them. "So, that's it?" he asked. She looked down. "For now. You didn't have to say goodbye. Most people don't." "I'm not most people," she said, stepping closer. "You know that now?" Jack nodded. "I do." Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded piece of paper. "This is the real offer they gave me, the one with all the strings attached. If I sign, I disappear from headlines and they make sure I never come back." Jack looked at it, then at her. "And if you don't, I fight. In court. In public. Alone." "You wouldn't be alone," he said quietly. She searched his eyes. "Would you mean that if I had nothing? No power, no title, just me?" Jack didn't blink. "I already did." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Then, maybe. I'll wait to sign." He stepped forward, brushing her hand as he took the paper. "Whatever you choose, don't vanish again. Not without telling us where the next bus is headed." Evelyn smiled bittersweet. "Deal." Then without another word she turned and walked down the street, tall, quiet, and not running this time. Not hiding. And though Jack watched her go, there was no finality in the moment. Just a pause in a conversation not yet finished. As the wind picked up Sophie's crayon drawing above the kitchen table, fluttered in the draft from the cracked window. The little stick-figure family beneath the sun held fast, taped gently to the wall. 3 people. 1 crown. Still waiting. Still hoping. Still believing that sometimes people do come back. Jack never read the morning paper anymore, but that day the headlines came to him anyway. Mrs. Delaney, his upstairs neighbor, knocked at his door before sunrise, holding the folded newspaper in one hand and a sympathetic look in the other. "You might want to see this," she said gently. Jack took it with a nod, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. Sophie stirred behind him on the couch, wrapped like a burrito in her blanket cocoon. The apartment smelled of leftover pancakes and lemon dish soap, a quiet morning waiting to start. He unfolded the paper slowly. Evelyn Hart's secret hideaway CEO allegedly disappeared to working-class apartment after scandal. A grainy photo dominated the front page. Evelyn in his coat, Sophie holding her hand, and Jack standing right beside them on the sidewalk. His name wasn't printed, but anyone who knew him would recognize the outline, the place, the truth. His jaw clenched. The article quoted unnamed sources and leaked internal memos. Words like unstable, reckless romantic entanglement unfit for leadership were sprinkled throughout like poison. Jack didn't need to read the rest. He folded the paper without a word. "Are they going to be mean to her now?" Sophie asked quietly from the couch, her big eyes fixed on him. Jack turned. "They already were." "She was trying to be nice," Sophie said. "She just wanted a minute to breathe." "I know," Jack said, sitting beside her, "but sometimes when people don't understand something good, they try to tear it apart." Sophie hugged her blanket tighter. "She didn't deserve that." "No," Jack said softly. "She didn't." That afternoon, Jack's phone buzzed. Blocked number. He let it ring the first time, and the second. On the third, he answered. "Jack, it's Tom Whitman." The name clicked instantly. Evelyn's longtime assistant. The one she said had tried to help, but was always caught between loyalty and survival. She's okay, Tom said quickly, physically, but she's not okay. Jack stood in the back of the auto shop wiping his hands on a rag, the article she found out an hour before it printed. The board leaked it. It was strategic. They want her to cave. Jack's voice dropped. And will she? I don't know, Tom admitted. But she's rattled. She hasn't said a word since she saw the photo. She just sat there staring at Sophie's map taped to her office wall. Jack closed his eyes, heart clenching. Where is she now? Still in the city. Still fighting, I think. But if you can... I think she needs someone who doesn't care about the brand. Jack didn't hesitate. Tell her I'm not hard to find. That evening, Jack stood alone in the darkened living room, Sophie already tucked into bed. The apartment hummed in its usual quiet rhythm. The wind knocked gently at the window pane. He looked down at the business card Evelyn had left behind the first time she vanished. Black with gold trim. Just a name and a number. No title, no shield. He hadn't called it, not once, until now. He picked up his phone and dialed. It rang, and rang, and rang. He was about to hang up when her voice came on low and fragile. Jack. There was a pause on his end. Not from hesitation, but from the flood of emotions he hadn't let himself feel until now. I saw the article, he said finally. She didn't respond. I'm sorry they came after you like that. I thought if I stepped away quietly they'd leave me with something, she whispered. But I was wrong. They wanted to break me. I didn't think they'd find you. Jack sighed. That part's not on you. That part's on cowards who don't know the first thing about real strength. Evelyn exhaled shakily. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never been scared like this before. Not when we went public. Not when we lost funding. But now it feels personal. Like I don't know where I end and the noise begins. You're still in there, Jack said. Beneath the press releases and the camera flashes and the boardroom daggers. You're still the woman who apologized to my daughter for waking her up. You're still the one who shared tea and couldn't finish her soup. She laughed just barely. That soup was awful. It was canned, he said. You were polite. I remember thinking she whispered that I hadn't felt safe like that in years. You were safe, Jack said. And you still are. But if you keep trying to play by their rules, they'll eat you alive. You need to rewrite the game. Silence. Then, would you help me? He hesitated for half a beat, not from doubt, but from the weight of what that promise might mean. Yes, he said, but only if we do it your way. Not theirs. I don't know what my way is yet. Then we find it together. Another pause. But this one felt different. Lighter. I kept Sophie's drawing, she said softly. It's the only thing in my office that reminds me who I want to be. She still thinks you'll come back. Do you? Evelyn asked, her voice almost too quiet. Jack took a breath. I don't think you ever really left. There was no reply. Just a soft, steady inhale like someone breathing again for the first time. Then the line disconnected. Jack stared at the phone for a long moment, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't need her to say anything more. She was still fighting, and this time she wasn't alone. It had been 5 days since the call. 5 days since Evelyn's voice, shaken but alive, had filled the quiet of Jack's apartment with something that felt like hope. But she hadn't called again. And Jack hadn't pushed. He told himself she was handling things, fighting her battle in boardrooms and back alleys of power he'd never see. He told himself she needed space, not saving. Still, every evening as he set the table for two, his eyes drifted to the third chair. The one she'd once pulled close without asking. The one Sophie insisted they leave empty. She might come by again, Sophie said one morning, brushing syrup from her chin. She liked the corner seat. Jack chuckled. She also said my coffee was a civil rights violation. Sophie giggled. That's because you use store-brand beans. Jack ruffled her hair and tried not to show how much he missed Evelyn's voice in that morning mix of toast and laughter. That afternoon, while Sophie was at school, Jack took a detour after work. His boots crunched down the sidewalk outside the Hartwell building, a sleek tower of tinted glass and polished stone. It looked like a different planet from the world he knew. He stood across the street, hands in his pockets, watching people come and go. No one glanced up. No one noticed him. And then, on the 14th floor, he saw it. A flash of paper, a taped-up drawing. Even from that distance, he could see the colorful crayon sun, the stick figures, the crown. His heart stopped. She still had the map. The next day, Sophie came home from school with a box under her arm and a proud grin on her face. "We made gratitude jars today," she announced, placing the glass container on the kitchen table. Inside were small folded notes, each written in Sophie's careful block letters. Jack picked one at random and read aloud. "I'm grateful for grilled cheese even when Dad burns it." Sophie shrugged. "It's still crunchy." Another read, "I'm grateful for Evelyn's peppermint tea." Jack paused. Sophie looked at him. "Do you think she's coming back?" He hesitated. "I think. She's figuring some things out." "I could help her figure," Sophie said confidently. "I'm really good at puzzles." Jack smiled, pulled her into a one-armed hug, and kissed the top of her head. "That, you are Bug." That weekend, the first snow of the season, dusted the sidewalks. Jack spent the morning fixing a leaky radiator in the apartment next door. By the time he returned, Sophie had created a makeshift tea party with her stuffed animals. "Peppermint or apple spice?" she asked as he walked in, holding out a chipped teacup with imaginary contents. Before he could answer, someone knocked at the door. Jack froze. Sophie beat him to it again. This time she didn't fling it open. She opened it carefully like it might be a dream. And there she was. Evelyn. Hair slightly wind-tousled, cheeks pink from the cold, a soft wool coat buttoned neatly to her chin. But the real change wasn't in how she looked, it was in her eyes. They were clear, steady. She knelt to Sophie's level and held out a real tin of peppermint tea. "I heard you might need a refill." Sophie beamed and threw her arms around her. Jack stepped forward, slowly, heart thudding. Evelyn stood and met his gaze. "I didn't sign it," she said. He blinked. "The deal." She nodded. "They gave me 3 days to reconsider. I spent them rereading Sophie's map." Jack exhaled, and I remembered what mattered. Evelyn stepped inside. Her voice was calm but laced with emotion. "They'll keep coming for me. The headlines, the pressure. But I've decided I'm not leaving myself behind this time." Jack swallowed. "What are you going to do?" "Start over," she said. "Not run, not disappear. Build something from the ground up. Something honest." Sophie tugged her hand. "Like our treehouse." Evelyn smiled. "Exactly like that." They sat at the tiny table with imaginary tea and paper napkins, and Jack couldn't help but laugh. "You know," he said, "this is probably the first board meeting you've ever attended where half the attendees are plush animals." Evelyn gave him a sideways glance. "It's also the first one that doesn't involve a hostile takeover." The three of them sat there for a long time, talking, laughing, sharing silence that felt like music. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the kitchen window, Evelyn leaned back and said, "I thought I had to choose between being someone powerful and being someone real. But maybe real is powerful." Jack nodded. "It always was. You just forgot." Sophie brought over her gratitude jar and placed it in front of Evelyn. "You can add something," she said. "We don't keep score here." Evelyn looked at the jar, then slowly tore a corner from the envelope she'd brought the tea in. She wrote something, folded it twice, and dropped it inside. Jack caught her eye. "What did you write?" She smiled softly. "Just grateful to be seen." The table wasn't empty anymore, and it never would be again. The next morning, Jack woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee. Not his usual bargain bin grounds, but something richer, smoother. For a disoriented moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard a quiet hum from the kitchen and the soft clink of ceramic. Evelyn. She was barefoot, hair tucked behind her ears, pouring 2 cups with the ease of someone who belonged. Jack leaned against the doorframe and watched. "You always make yourself at home in other people's kitchens." She turned, arching a brow. "Only in kitchens with leaky faucets and subpar coffee filters." He grinned. "You fix the filter, I own 17 hotels. I can manage a drip machine." They sat at the table, the third chair, Sophie's still empty, while she slept in. Evelyn cupped her hands around the mug, not sipping yet. She seemed hesitant, thoughtful, like she was holding back a tide. Jack leaned in. "You didn't come back just to make coffee, did you?" Evelyn sighed, her smile fading. "No, I came because I need to ask you something." He braced. "What is it?" She pulled a folded document from her coat pocket and laid it on the table. It was an official board resolution. Hartwell's seal stamped in gold. A clause highlighted in yellow ink. Conduct unbecoming or behavior that compromises brand image. Jack skimmed the paragraph. "They're threatening you again. They're planning to force a vote. This time it's not about my leadership. It's about my personal choices." His eyes narrowed. "Us." She nodded. "The photo. The story. The fact that I disappeared into the life of a single dad with no corporate connections." Jack's jaw tightened. "So they're saying, you can't be seen with people like me. They're saying I'm a liability, that I've made myself too accessible, too ordinary." They're using words like emotionally compromised, unsuitable for visibility, and optics liability. He pushed the paper back toward her. "You don't need my permission to walk away from them." "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I'm asking if I walk away. Will you be there when I land?" That question, so simple yet so heavy, hung between them. Jack stared at her. At the woman who had once hidden in the shadows of a bus stop, who had wept quietly into a borrowed blanket, who had served imaginary tea to a little girl who'd claimed her as family. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you walked away once already. And we never closed the door." She blinked. "So you'd still have me knowing what they're saying?" He gave a half laugh. "What they're saying doesn't scare me. What scares me is that you'd believe them." Evelyn dropped her gaze, biting her lip. "I don't. Not anymore. But I also don't want to be the reason your life gets complicated." Jack shrugged. "It already was. Then you showed up and gave it meaning." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Then I need to tell the board that I'm stepping down," she said. Jack's brows lifted. "Stepping down. Like permanently?" She nodded. "They want me to disappear into the foundation quietly. Fine, I'll do it. But not because they bullied me. Because I'm choosing a life with value beyond visibility. I want to build things from the ground up again. Truthfully. Simply." Jack nodded slowly. "You sure?" "No," she said honestly. "But I've never been more ready." That afternoon, the storm broke. News alerts hit every platform at once. Evelyn Hart steps down from Hartwell International in a stunning move, sources say. Personal scandal. Prompted exit, CEO, allegedly, emotionally compromised. Who is Jack Miller, the man in the CEO's final photo? His name was everywhere. His photo, grainy distant, was in the corner of the coverage. And so was Sophie's. Jack stood in the corner of the living room phone, in hand heart racing. Sophie, sitting cross-legged on the couch, looked up from her coloring. "Did something bad happen?" He shook his head, slow and steady. "No bug. Just a lot of people paying attention now. Because of Evelyn." "Yeah." She was quiet a moment, then asked, "Do you still want her to come over for grilled cheese tonight?" He smiled, more than ever. She arrived at dusk, not in a black car or with a briefcase, but on foot, wearing jeans, a soft sweater, and carrying a paper bag of groceries. "I brought the good cheese," she said. Jack let her in. She kissed Sophie on the forehead, set the bag on the counter, and turned to him. "You okay?" she asked. I should be asking you that. I was expecting the storm, she said. I just didn't expect to feel lighter afterward. He stepped toward her. Because it's over. Because I didn't cave. They cooked together, laughing, burning one sandwich, feeding Sophie bites off the spatula. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't clean, but it was real. After dinner, they sat on the couch, Sophie asleep between them. Evelyn leaned her head on Jack's shoulder. You know, she whispered for someone who used to run million-dollar campaigns, I've never felt more successful than I did tonight, spreading mustard on grilled cheese with a 9-year-old. Jack kissed the top of her head. That's because this is the first time you didn't have to perform for anyone. She nodded, eyes closing. And in that moment, quiet, unguarded Evelyn Hart was no longer a CEO, no longer a headline, no longer a public figure with a reputation to shield. She was just a woman, resting against the man who had seen her first in the dark before the world remembered her name. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of being ordinary. Jack hadn't expected things to change so quickly, but they did. The Monday after Evelyn's announcement, the world around him tilted. It started with whispers at the auto shop jokes at first, then curious glances. You're the guy from the photo, right? One customer asked, trying too hard to sound casual. Another mechanic nudged him during a break, grinning. Didn't know you had billionaire taste, Miller. Jack kept his replies short, his head down. The world loved a story like this, a single dad and a CEO, but they didn't see the nights when he stayed awake wondering if she regretted everything. If walking away from Hartwell would cost her more than she had bargained for. But Evelyn, in her own way, held steady. She didn't vanish again. Instead, she returned to Jack and Sophie's life not as a headline, but as a real person, stubborn, determined, and imperfect. She was there for dinners, for school drop-offs, for quiet walks through the park with Sophie holding both their hands. She started writing ideas for a non-profit on Jack's kitchen counter, with Sophie doodling stars around the margins. Still, Jack felt it, that slow friction of two worlds brushing against each other. He'd grown up around people who fixed things with their hands. She had grown up in rooms where people were taught to fix things with money strategy spin. And while Evelyn had chosen this new path freely, her past still lingered like a shadow. That Friday, as they sat around the table for dinner, Evelyn slicing apples while Sophie recited a story she'd written, Jack noticed Evelyn's phone vibrating face down on the counter. She hadn't touched it all evening. You gonna get that? He asked. Evelyn glanced at the screen, then shook her head. It's a reporter. Again. Probably about the foundation launch next week. You sure you're ready to be in the spotlight again? Jack asked gently. Evelyn paused, then said, This time, it's on my terms. But Jack wasn't just talking about press conferences. He meant this odd, beautiful triangle of man, woman, and child stitched together by chance and choice. After Sophie went to bed, Jack stepped onto the balcony, letting the cold air clear his head. Evelyn joined him a few minutes later, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. They stood silently looking out over the neighborhood. You ever feel like you're standing between two versions of yourself? She asked. All the time, Jack said. One that survived, and one that still wonders if that's enough. Evelyn nodded. I still get emails from board members, colleagues, old friends. Some tell me I'm brave, others say I'm foolish, that I threw it all away for a temporary romance. Jack looked at her. Is that what this is? Temporary, her eyes flickered. No, but it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things scare people, especially powerful ones. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked, Do you miss it? The power, the control. Evelyn looked down, considering. I miss knowing exactly who I was in a room. I miss walking in and having people pause just because I said something. But I don't miss being alone in a room full of people. Jack studied her. And now she turned to face him fully. Now I'm still figuring out who I am without the armor. But when I walk into this apartment, I don't need anyone to pause. I just need Sophie to smile and you to hand me a mug of bad coffee. He smirked. Getting picky now, are we? She laughed. I said need, not prefer. They stood in silence again before Jack said, I want this. You me, Sophie. But I need to know you're not looking back with regret. Evelyn stepped closer. I'm not looking back, but I am learning how to live forward differently, more vulnerably. Jack touched her hand. Good, because this life doesn't come with headlines. It comes with grocery runs and sick days and burnt toast. You okay with that? Evelyn nodded, her voice thick. I'm okay with all of it, as long as it's with you. That weekend, Jack and Sophie helped Evelyn move a few things into a small shared workspace she'd rented with 2 other women, both former executives turned dreamers. The place had peeling paint, mismatched furniture, and a startup energy Jack recognized. Kind of a downgrade from your old corner office, he joked as they carried in a box of donated laptops. Evelyn smiled, brushing dust from a second-hand chair. I never needed the office. I needed permission to start over. She opened a drawer in the desk and placed something inside a crumpled piece of construction paper. Sophie's map. Jack watched her carefully. You know, he said the world may not know what to make of you now. But Sophie already decided. She thinks you're royalty. Evelyn smiled through misty eyes. Then I'll try to live up to that crown. He stepped forward, wrapping an arm around her waist. You already have. In that quiet, imperfect room with its scratched floors and chipped mugs, they didn't need anyone else's permission. They had chosen each other. And in a world that demanded polish, their shared chaos felt like grace. Rain lashed the windows like a restless drummer as Jack drove through the early evening gloom, windshield wipers struggling to keep up. The old pickup creaked with every turn, but it held together like him held together by years of necessity, grit, and love. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, bundled in her raincoat, her feet barely touching the floor. Her backpack was soaked from where it had brushed the wet sidewalk. I told Mrs. Hadley I'd bring Evelyn to Career Day, she said through a yawn. She said CEOs are cool. Jack gave a half smile. Evelyn's not a CEO anymore, remember? Sophie shrugged. She's still cooler than Mr. Davis, and he makes sausage at Costco. Jack laughed, the sound warm in the cab. That she is. They pulled into their complex just as thunder cracked overhead. Jack opened Sophie's door, lifted her out, and carried her through the downpour. They were soaked by the time they reached the stairwell, laughing, breathless, dripping. As they reached the landing, Jack paused. The hallway was dim, but he saw it a silhouette hunched near the door. Evelyn. Her coat was soaked through her arms, wrapped tightly around herself, head bowed. Jack's heart froze. Sophie, he said quietly, go inside and change. I'll be right in. Sophie didn't argue. She sensed something wasn't right. Evelyn looked up slowly. Her eyes were rimmed red, her face pale, but it was her hands that caught him still trembling. Are you hurt? He asked, voice low. No. She shook her head quickly. Not physically. He unlocked the door and guided her inside. She didn't resist. He sat her on the couch, fetched her a towel, then sat across from her as rain streaked the window like sorrow. I got the call 10 minutes after I left the foundation office, she whispered. Tom was driving me back from a donor meeting. I was checking emails. Sophie's school was listed in a traffic report. Jack leaned forward. What happened? There was an accident near the school. A van jumped the curb, hit the sidewalk. There were kids. Jack's blood ran cold. Sophie. No, she's okay. Evelyn exhaled hard. She'd already left for the day. But, seeing her name in the alert just for a moment, everything collapsed. I couldn't breathe. Jack's hand ran through his hair. I raced here without thinking, she continued. I had to see her, make sure she was real, that this life I chose wasn't just borrowed. Jack knelt in front of her, taking her hands. It's not borrowed. It's real. It's ours. Evelyn broke then, not into sobs, but something quieter. A single tear down her cheek. A sharp exhale. the collapse of every internal wall she had held since leaving that skyscraper life behind. "I don't want to lose her," she whispered. "Or you." "You won't," Jack said firmly, "unless you walk away again." "I'm not walking," she said. I'm afraid. Every part of me that used to be sure, used to be in control. It's gone." Jack looked into her eyes. "Good. Maybe now you can build something that won't fall apart when life hits back." She let out a shaky laugh. "That sounds like something your daughter would say." "Probably." He helped her up and into the bedroom where Sophie was already tucked in pretending to be asleep. But when Evelyn leaned over to brush a hand through her hair, Sophie whispered, "I knew you'd come." Evelyn kissed her forehead. "I'll always come." Later that night, as Evelyn sat curled on the couch wrapped in one of Jack's old flannel shirts, she looked around the modest apartment. There were no polished floors, no private elevators, no designer wine racks. But there was something stronger than any of that. Roots. "I've been so many things," she murmured. A daughter they dressed like a doll. A student who couldn't fail. A CEO who didn't have permission to cry. And now, for the first time, I'm just a person. And it terrifies me. Jack leaned beside her, their knees brushing. "You're allowed to be terrified, but you're not allowed to give up." She nodded. "So what now?" "You stop surviving," he said, "and start choosing." Evelyn turned toward him. "Then I choose this. I choose you. I choose Sophie. I choose late dinners and cold coffee and mismatched socks. I choose every part of this chaos if it means I get to come home to something real." Jack pulled her close, and for the first time since she left her boardroom life behind, Evelyn allowed herself to believe it that maybe she wasn't falling apart. Maybe she was falling into place. Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind dying into silence, the rain softening into mist. And somewhere between the quiet and the heartbeat beneath her ear, Evelyn found something she hadn't known she needed. Peace, not the polished, curated kind, but the kind that only lives in a home that forgives you for who you used to be and loves you anyway. It had been nearly a year since that cold night at the bus stop, the night that changed everything, though none of them had known it at the time. The old street lamp still flickered faintly at the corner of Henson and 12th, casting a soft amber glow on the sidewalk below. Spring had finally returned, bringing with it the scent of rain-drenched earth and blooming dogwoods that lined the neighborhood streets. Jack stood on the stoop of their building, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, watching Sophie skip ahead in her little white sneakers, a paper crown slightly askew on her head. Behind her, Evelyn walked with steady steps, her eyes bright, her smile quiet and sure. She looked every bit the woman she had become, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer split between two worlds. She had chosen one, and stayed. The new community center had officially opened that morning. Not a flashy event, no red carpet, just neighbors' kids, volunteers, and a small brass plaque by the front door. The Hartwell Center for New Beginnings, founded by Evelyn Clare Hart in honor of second chances. Inside, it offered language classes, job training, childcare, and a modest free library. The startup funding had come from the final settlement Evelyn negotiated as she formally stepped down from Hartwell. Not to walk away bitter, but to walk away better. Jack had helped rebuild the building from its bones. Sophie had drawn every mural on the classroom walls. Together they had woven their quiet kind of magic into something permanent. And now, the evening after its grand opening, Evelyn had asked for one thing. To walk back to where it started, she said. Full circle. So here they were, just three people walking slowly through the neighborhood with a memory in their bones and a future in their hands. When they reached the bus stop, Jack paused. It looked exactly the same. The bench, the broken glass in one corner, the faint rust on the signpost. But tonight it wasn't cold. It wasn't lonely. Evelyn reached out and ran her hand along the back of the bench. I remember the way the wind sounded that night. I thought I was disappearing. Jack leaned beside her, brushing her hand gently with his own. "And you ended up being found." She turned toward him. "By you." Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes said enough. Sophie plopped down on the bench and stretched her arms dramatically. "Can I tell people this is where my parents met?" Evelyn blinked. "Parents?" Sophie shrugged. "Well, not yet, but I'm working on it." Jack laughed. Evelyn tried to hide her smile, but it broke through anyway. "You're relentless. I learned from you," Sophie said proudly. There was a long, sweet silence. Then Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jack blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, are you proposing to me?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Not yet." Inside the box was a delicate silver charm in the shape of a street lamp. "For you," she said, placing it in his hand. "For being the light that stayed on when everything else went dark." Jack swallowed hard. "I don't have a ring yet," he whispered, "but I've been carrying this around for months." He reached into his own coat pocket and pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper, creased, weathered, and familiar. Sophie's original map. 3 stick figures, a sun, a crown. "I never stopped carrying us," he said, unfolding it carefully. Evelyn stared at the drawing, tears welling. "You kept it." "You were never just a guest," he said. "You were always home." She leaned in and their lips met, not rushed, not dramatic, just quiet, warm, and certain. A promise sealed in breath and memory. Behind them, Sophie clapped her hands. "Okay, now can I say you're my family?" Jack and Evelyn looked at each other smiling, then said together, "Yes." They walked home slowly under the soft light of that old street lamp. No reporters, no press, just 3 hearts moving as one. Inside the apartment, the air smelled of roasted vegetables and something baking. Evelyn had picked up a new hobby, cooking with imperfection. Jack had given up judging her timing, and Sophie had become the designated taste tester. Later that night, with the dishes done and the couch a nest of pillows, Jack wrapped his arms around Evelyn while Sophie snored gently against them, her crown slipping sideways. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night?" Evelyn whispered. Jack didn't need time to answer. "No, because you did stop. And that's the only version of the story I ever want." Evelyn closed her eyes, pressing her face into his shoulder. She no longer needed boardrooms or titles to feel whole. She had chosen love over legacy, grace over image, truth over safety. And in return, she had found a life that wasn't perfect but was undeniably hers, a life under the same streetlight, where she was finally seen, where she finally stayed, and where for the first time in her life she was never going to walk alone again. Single Dad walked into CEO's office with resume. 1 sentence from his daughter made the CEO cry. The revolving doors of Sloane Tower hissed shut behind him, sealing off the noise of the city and replacing it with the hush of climate-controlled air and polished marble. Gabe's boots made soft, uncertain taps against the gleaming floor, each step echoing a truth he could barely admit to himself. He didn't belong here. Beside him, Ellie clutched his hand, her small fingers laced tightly through his. She wore her best dress blue with little white flowers and had insisted on braiding her own hair that morning. There was a smudge of jelly on her sleeve he hadn't noticed until they were halfway across town, and now it mocked him loud as his thudding heartbeat. "Are you sure this is a good idea, sweetheart?" Gabe whispered, lowering his voice as they approached the towering reception desk. His voice cracked from exhaustion, from self-doubt, from the sheer weight of months spent trying to stay afloat. Ellie looked up at him, those steady hazel eyes of hers full of more belief than he could summon for himself. "You promised you'd try," she said simply. And so he nodded because she was right, because sometimes courage came in pigtails and jelly stains. The receptionist didn't hide her skepticism. She was dressed in sharp black like a chess piece stationed to guard the gate. Her eyes flicked from Gabe's work-worn jacket to Ellie's scuffed shoes, her smile polite and brittle. Do you have an appointment, she asked, already reaching for the clipboard that said, "You don't belong here," in invisible ink. No, Gabe said, but I brought a resume. I'm looking for work. Maintenance. I used to be a systems engineer. I heard this company was expanding. The woman's eyebrows arched. Sir, Ms. Sloan doesn't handle hiring directly. You'll need to go through HR. Then Ellie stepped forward. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper worn at the creases and decorated with glitter stickers around the edges. She placed it gently on the counter, smoothing it with her tiny palm. I wrote a note, she said. It's for Mrs. Sloan. The receptionist blinked. Gabe opened his mouth to explain to apologize, but Ellie was already speaking. My dad's the smartest person I know, she said clearly. He used to fix machines that make whole cities run. He only stopped fixing things when my mom died. But now, I think, maybe, if he had a job again, he'd smile more. The words hung in the air like a sudden hush after thunder. The receptionist hesitated. Then without a word, she picked up the note and disappeared through a glass-paneled door. Gabe wanted to scoop Ellie up and leave before security asked them to. But he couldn't move, not when Ellie was standing so still, so brave, like this was all part of some quiet plan she believed in more than anything. Moments passed. 5, 10, the kind of minutes that stretch into eternity when you're waiting for judgment. Then the door opened again. You, the receptionist, said, her voice different now. Come with me. Gabe instinctively looked around, sure she meant someone else. But no, her gaze was fixed on him. He cleared his throat. Just me. No, the woman said. Miss Crew, Mint Sloan, wants to see you. Both of you. They were led through a labyrinth of glass and steel, past people in sleek suits holding coffee-like weapons, past hallways that smelled like success and hand sanitizer. Ellie's hand stayed wrapped in his like a lifeline. Then, suddenly, they were in the office. Avery Sloan stood by the window, her silhouette cut against the skyline like a statue carved from ambition. She turned as they entered, her expression unreadable. She was younger than Gabe expected, early 30s maybe, and striking in a way that was less about beauty and more about presence. Everything about her said she made decisions that could change lives before breakfast. "This is your daughter?" she asked. Gabe nodded stiffly. "Ellie. And you're—" "Gabriel Klein," she said, glancing down at the handwritten paper Ellie had delivered. "Former systems engineer, currently working nights at Garrison Auto, and looking for something better." Her voice was smooth, precise. Dangerous. Yes, ma'am," Gabe said. "I didn't mean to intrude. My daughter thought—" He trailed off, the absurdity of it all crashing down on him. Avery turned to Ellie. "You wrote this?" she asked. Ellie nodded. "I didn't know your email." There was a pause. A long one. Then Avery crossed the room and crouched down in front of Ellie so they were eye to eye. "You said your dad stopped smiling," she said softly. "Why did you bring him here?" Ellie shrugged. "You're the boss. Bosses can help." Avery stood slowly. She looked at Gabe, and for the first time there was something in her eyes he didn't expect. Not judgment, not superiority. Recognition. She walked behind her desk, then paused before sitting. "Mr. Klein," she said. "Sit down." It wasn't a suggestion. He sat, heart-pounding. Ellie climbed into the oversized leather chair beside him, legs dangling. Avery studied him for a long moment. "Why did you really come here?" she asked. Gabe took a breath. "Because I used to build systems that made other people's jobs easier, efficient, smart. But after my wife passed, I couldn't think. I took whatever job I could, anything to keep Ellie safe. But now she's watching me settle. I didn't want that to be what she learned." Another silence. Then Avery said, "Do you believe you're still capable of more?" Gabe hesitated, then answered, "Yes." She tapped the glittery paper with one manicured finger. "Then I suggest we find out." Gabe stared at her, stunned. "You're giving me a chance." He asked, disbelief and relief fighting in his voice. I'm giving Ellie's letter a chance. Avery said, her tone cool, but not cold. Let's see where it leads. Gabe didn't know what to say, but Ellie reached over, took his hand again, and whispered, I told you she'd listen. And for the first time in a long time, Gabe Klein smiled. The elevator ride down was silent except for the faint squeak of Ellie's sneakers against the polished floor. Gabe kept glancing at her reflection in the mirrored panel, still half expecting to wake up. Every inch of him tensed with disbelief, and a flickering sense of danger like joy wasn't allowed to last too long in his life. He wanted to ask Ellie what made her so sure this would work. But deep down, he already knew. She had something he'd lost long ago, unshakable belief in people. In the lobby, they stepped out into the open air. The city hadn't changed, but Gabe had. Something had shifted, however slightly, the moment Avery Sloane had looked him in the eye and said, let's see where it leads. 3 days later, Gabe returned to Sloane Tower, this time alone. Ellie was in school, a local public elementary where the lunchroom smelled like old apples and the teachers tried their best. He'd packed her a peanut butter sandwich and a napkin she'd insisted on drawing a sun on. So, you don't forget to smile, she'd said. The memory stayed with him as he entered the back corridor of the building where he'd been instructed to meet with the facility's director. The air smelled different here, less like power and glass, more like sweat wires and coffee left too long in the pot. A man in his 50s with a peppered beard and heavy boots was waiting by a storage cage. You, Klein? He asked without looking up from a clipboard. Yes, sir. Sir makes me feel old, the man said, handing him a badge. Name's Wallace. We'll see what you're made of. Gabe didn't argue. He'd been tested before in jobs and grief and survival. He followed Wallace through narrow maintenance corridors and boiler rooms humming with machinery. The building had over 40 floors, state-of-the-art HVAC systems, lighting arrays that could talk to each other, and touchscreen security panels. Gabe recognized half the systems by name. You'd done this kind of work before, Wallace asked as Gabe scanned a misbehaving control panel. Yes, Gabe said, crouching to reset the power interface. Not recently, but this part of my brain never turned off. Wallace grunted. You were an engineer once, weren't you? I was. Why'd you leave? Gabe hesitated. Life changed. That seemed to be answer enough. Wallace didn't press. By the end of the shift, Gabe had repaired 2 malfunctioning thermostats, recalibrated a miswired elevator call button, and quietly reprogrammed a sensor that had baffled the night crew for weeks. Wallace clapped him on the back. You've got hands and brains. You don't find that much anymore. Gabe half smiled. I'm just grateful to be useful again. Wallace nodded. You'll stay on. Probationary. You report to me, but Monsieur Sloane has final say. At the mention of her name, Gabe's chest tightened. He hadn't seen her again since that first day. It felt surreal, like she'd stepped in for a single act in a play and disappeared before the curtain rose. Still, every tool he picked up, every screw he tightened, it was all done with a quiet determination to prove her right. Not about his resume, about Ellie's. That evening, Gabe picked Ellie up from school. She came running out of the front door's backpack, bouncing cheeks red from the cold. Well, she asked breathlessly. Did she fire you already? He chuckled, kneeling down to her height. Not yet. Ellie grinned. Told you. On the walk home, she pulled something from her bag, a folded paper with red crayon drawings. What's this? Gabe asked. I made your resume better, she said, in case they need a new one. Gabe unfolded the page. It read, My dad fixes everything, carries all the groceries, makes pancakes with faces, hugs like a champion, still loves even when he's sad. Please hire him forever. There was a picture of a man with big arms, a little girl holding his hand, and a tall woman in a pointy blazer all standing under a rainbow. She said yes because of you. You know, Gabe said quietly. Ellie shrugged. Maybe. But she'll keep saying yes if you show her the rest. The next day, something unexpected happened. As Gabe was checking the water pressure valves on the 31st floor, his radio buzzed. Facilities, this is front desk. Mr. Klein, Miss Sloan request your presence in her office." His hand froze on the valve. He wasn't afraid, exactly, just unsteady. You didn't get summoned by someone like Avery Sloan without it meaning something big, or something bad. When he arrived, the receptionist gave him a respectful nod and gestured toward the executive elevator. The ride up was longer than he remembered. When the doors opened, her assistant greeted him with a smile. "She's waiting." Inside, the office looked the same: glass walls, skyline views, minimalist furniture that cost more than his old pickup. But Avery Sloan was different. She stood by the bookshelf holding a file. When she turned, there was something softer in her posture, still composed, still powerful, but human. "Mr. Klein," she said, "I reviewed your performance notes." Gabe nodded, unsure what to say. "I also spoke with Wallace. He said you fixed a code conflict in the central panel without being asked. I noticed it during a system scan," Gabe said. "It was inefficient." Avery nodded slowly. Then she opened the file in her hand. "Is this yours?" she asked. Gabe squinted. It was Ellie's red crayon resume. His heart stopped. "Oh, she keeps copies. I can see that." Avery almost smiled. She listed hugs like a champion. "I'm not sure how that translates to asset management." Gabe rubbed the back of his neck. "She's thorough." Avery looked at him, more curious now than amused. "Why did you come to me that day?" she asked. "Not to HR. Not to apply online." "Why me?" Gabe hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because Ellie believes in people, and she saw something in you the rest of the world didn't warn her against." Avery blinked at that. For a moment, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who didn't quite know how to receive kindness. "I have a position opening on our systems integration team," she said. "It's part-time, but specialized. Your skills would be useful." Gabe stared at her, stunned. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "No," she replied, "but maybe you needed it." There was silence. Then Gabe extended his hand. "Thank you, Miss Sloan." She took it. "Call me Avery." And just like that, the glass between their worlds didn't feel so thick anymore. The boiler room on the 26th floor hummed with low mechanical rhythm metal on metal heat, pushing through grates, a system always on the verge of needing attention, but never quite breaking. Gabe stood over the circuit map, a faded blueprint pinned to the wall, and squinted through a sheen of sweat. The wiring didn't match the diagram, which meant someone had jury-rigged the panel years ago. He ran a hand across his beard and smiled faintly. "Just like the old days," he muttered, pulling out his multi-tool. Since joining the maintenance team, Gabe had worked quietly, methodically. He clocked in early, stayed late, and tackled every repair request with the discipline of a man trying to rebuild something bigger than an HVAC unit, something like dignity, or trust, or a future. No one talked much to him. Maintenance crews usually stayed on their own floor of the food chain. But by the end of week 2, even the skeptical Wallace was starting to nod with a kind of respect. "Guy doesn't just fix things," Wallace had muttered to another tech. "He listens to them." Upstairs, however, someone else was listening too. Avery Sloan stood behind the tinted glass of her office, arms crossed as she watched the security monitor. The camera angle showed Gabe kneeling beneath a utility panel on the executive floor, rerouting wires as if he'd been born for it. He moved with precision, not rush. There was grace in it, which surprised her. "Third day in a row he's caught an error." No one else reported, said her assistant Rachel, handing her a fresh printout. "He's not just fixing problems, he's improving the system." Avery nodded absently. "What's he not doing?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "He's not talking, not asking for anything, not taking breaks." Avery's gaze didn't leave the screen. "That's what worries me." She wasn't used to people like Gabe Klein. Most of the men she dealt with in boardrooms wore ambition like cologne, loud and lingering. Gabe, on the other hand, moved through her world like a ghost with calloused hands. Quiet, competent, unclaimed by ego, and yet undeniably present. She turned away from the monitor. Ask Wallace to schedule a fire systems inspection on 31, she said. Tell him to send Gabe. Rachel blinked. That floor's clean. I know. Later that afternoon, Gabe was in the stairwell heading toward the 31st floor when he heard a sharp, rhythmic clatter from behind one of the corridor panels. It wasn't urgent, but it wasn't right either. He paused, knelt, and removed the screws. Inside, the sensor node had come loose from its housing, its bolt barely hanging on. Gabe reached into his belt pouch and carefully realigned it, fingers working with ease. As he tightened the last screw, he sensed someone behind him. He turned and froze. Avery Sloane stood just a few feet away, arms folded, heels clicking softly against the floor. "You don't skip details," she said. "No," Gabe replied, rising slowly. "Details don't stay skipped. They come back louder." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, brief but real. "I had this floor inspected just last week." Gabe gave a small shrug. Then it wanted to be seen again. They stood there in the quiet for a moment, the hallway catching a patch of late-afternoon sun through the tall windows. It cast a warm glow between them, though neither moved closer. "I used to build systems like these," Gabe said after a beat. "Cities, actually. Before, things changed." "I read your file," Avery replied. "You left the industry 3 years ago. No litigation, no black marks, just gone." He hesitated. "It wasn't the work. It was everything else. Your wife." He nodded. "Cancer. Quick. Unfair. Ellie was 5. Avery's voice softened. "I'm sorry." "So was I," he murmured. They lapsed into silence again. Then Avery's tone shifted, becoming businesslike again, but not cold. "I'm holding a quarterly ops review next week. The systems team will be presenting. Wallace says you've already identified 3 efficiency gaps our last engineers missed." Gabe tilted his head. "You want me in that meeting. I want your brain in that room," Avery said. "The rest is optional." He smiled wryly. "I'll need a cleaner shirt. You'll have one. I'll have it delivered." As she turned to leave, Gabe said quietly, "Ellie thinks you're a superhero." Avery paused. "I'm not," she replied, "but I remember what it's like to wish one would show up." Then she walked away. That night, Gabe returned home to their modest apartment 2 rooms above a shuttered deli with a window that barely closed. Ellie was coloring at the table, surrounded by scattered crayons and a half-finished peanut butter sandwich. "How was today?" she asked without looking up. "Productive," Gabe said, setting down his tool bag. "Met with Miss Sloane again." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Did she smile this time?" He chuckled. "A little." "I knew it," Ellie said confidently, digging through her box of crayons. "That means it's working. What is the fixing?" "You're not just fixing the building, Dad. You're fixing her." Gabe stopped, caught off guard. "I'm not sure that's how it works, Elle." She looked up with the full force of 8-year-old certainty. "People break, too. You just have to look where it's cracked." He sat down slowly across from her, overwhelmed by the strange truth in her words. "And what if they don't want to be fixed?" he asked. Ellie smiled. "Then you just sit with them until they do." In the quiet hours after Ellie had gone to bed, Gabe unfolded one of her drawings she'd left for him on the counter. 3 figures again. Him, Ellie, and now, unmistakably, a tall woman in a blazer with stars in her eyes, Avery. He stared at it for a long time, not because he believed in fairy tales, but because maybe, just maybe somewhere deep in the heart of a steel and glass tower, something human was waking up. The day the invitation came, Gabe nearly threw it away. Not a printed invitation, of course. Avery Sloane wasn't that kind of formal. It was a short message typed from her assistant and delivered by Wallace with a confused shake of the head. "Miss Avery Sloane would like to invite you and your daughter to the executive pantry for a private dinner Thursday evening. 6:30 p.m. Gabe read it 3 times before daring to believe it wasn't a mistake. He waited until Ellie got home from school to tell her. She was already dropping her backpack with a crash when he held up the folded note. "We got invited somewhere," he said carefully. Ellie blinked. Is it the dentist? No, he laughed. It's dinner, with Miss Sloane. Her face lit up like it was Christmas morning. You mean like real dinner with her? He nodded. Ellie spun once in the middle of the living room. I have to wear my blue dress, the one with the silver belt. Gabe raised an eyebrow. We don't have a silver belt. I'll draw one. Thursday came with surprising calm. Gabe left work early to help Ellie get ready. She sat on a stool in front of the cracked mirror humming as he carefully braided her hair. You look beautiful, he said when they finished. She nodded solemnly. You look nervous. I am. Don't be. She likes you. She just doesn't know how to say it yet. Gabe swallowed hard. That's not how bosses work, kiddo. Ellie grinned. Then she's a different kind of boss. The executive pantry was nothing like a cafeteria. Gabe had expected metal chairs and lukewarm buffet trays. Instead, it was a sleek minimalist lounge with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern lighting, and a long wooden table set for 3. A soft jazz track played in the background, barely audible above the low hum of the city outside. Avery Sloane stood near the window in a deep green dress that looked effortless but expensive. She wasn't holding a tablet. No phone in sight. Just her arms crossed loosely, a glass of water in her hand, and an expression that wavered between composed and strangely uncertain. You came, she said. You invited us, Gabe replied. Ellie didn't wait. She marched up to Avery and held out a napkin. I drew your superhero outfit, she announced, in case you forget. Avery took the napkin with more reverence than most people would have given a diamond necklace. It showed her in a cape, of course, with Gabe and Ellie on either side. The sun wore sunglasses. There were hearts in the sky. Avery smiled, small but sincere. Thank you. Ellie climbed into her seat like she owned the place. Dinner was simple grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and warm rolls served on ceramic plates. A private chef delivered it with a quiet nod and vanished. Gabe could barely touch his food. Is this normal? He asked Avery as Ellie chatted about spelling bees and playground rules. Not at all, Avery said, sipping her water. But maybe it should be. You invite employees to dinner. Only the ones who arrive with crayon resumes and reprogram my building systems in their sleep. That made him smile. Ellie excused herself halfway through to explore the view, pressing her nose against the glass. The city lights glittered beneath her, and her reflection danced beside them. She's good for you, Avery said softly. She saved me, Gabe admitted. After Lauren, my wife, passed, I wasn't sure I had anything left. But Ellie, she kept asking me to keep showing up. So I did. Avery leaned back, studying him. You're different from the men I usually meet. I'm guessing they don't carry lunchboxes shaped like unicorns. She laughed, a brief, unguarded sound that startled them both. No, she said. They carry spreadsheets and grudges. Gabe looked at her more closely. There was something in her eyes tonight, fatigue maybe, but not from work. A kind of weariness that didn't sleep. Who shows up for you? He asked quietly. The question lingered longer than either of them expected. Avery didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out toward Ellie. I don't know, she admitted. No one lately. I built walls to stay safe, and now I can't tell if I'm protecting myself or keeping everyone out. Gabe nodded. They feel the same from inside. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just honest. Then came the knock. Rachel stood at the door, face pale. There's a reporter in the lobby, she whispered, stepping inside. Someone leaked a photo of Mr. Klein entering the executive floor. They're asking questions. Avery's eyes darkened. Who leaked it? I'm guessing someone in legal, Rachel replied. You've been under pressure lately about optics. This will light things up. Gabe tensed. I didn't ask for attention. I know Avery said. But he could see it now, his face in some article titled Single Dad in the Boardroom APR Gamble. And Avery would be painted as impulsive or unprofessional. This was her world. Reputation was currency. I should go, he said, rising. No, Avery replied. But Ellie had already sensed the shift. She stepped back from the window, eyes wide. Did we do something wrong? Gabe crouched in front of her. No, sweetheart. But sometimes the world likes to pretend it understands things that it doesn't. Avery watched him go, her hands clenched at her sides. There was something she wanted to say, some words stuck in her throat like a truth she hadn't dared name. But by the time she found it, they were gone. That night, Gabe lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Are we in trouble? Ellie asked from her mattress nearby. No. Is she? Gabe hesitated. I hope not. Ellie rolled over, hugging her stuffed unicorn close. Then maybe we just have to fix her too. And in the dark, Gabe found himself whispering the same thing he once said beside a hospital bed, beside a grave, beside the mirror, when he couldn't recognize his own face. We'll try. Avery Sloane stood in her office alone, the skyline behind her fading into dusk. The windows had always been her armor glass and elevation, giving her a kind of detachment, as though she lived above the consequences of ordinary life. But tonight, the glass felt thin, fragile, like someone had tapped on it from the inside and she could finally hear the cracks. The news had hit faster than expected. The gossip blogs ran with it. CEO invites janitor to dinner. Is this romance or recklessness? The worst part wasn't the headline, it was the comments, hundreds of them. Judging, twisting, mocking. She had faced corporate lawsuits with less venom. Avery reached for her phone 3 times to call Gabe, and 3 times she stopped. What would she say? Sorry my world tried to turn yours into a scandal, but it wasn't just about him. Or Ellie. It was about something she'd buried long before either of them walked through her door, a fear of being seen for who she was underneath the titles and press releases. Vulnerable. Messy. Needing connection. She hadn't cried in years. Not when her mother walked out. Not when her father died of a stroke and left behind a pile of regrets. Not even when she signed her first billion-dollar deal. But tonight, her eyes stung. And still she didn't cry. She simply reached for her coat and whispered to no one, enough. Gabe didn't hear the knock at first. Ellie had just fallen asleep on the couch after another round of Dad, can I draw one more superhero, and the apartment was finally quiet. The soft hum of the heater and the worn groan of city pipes were his background music. Then came the knock, 3 short, deliberate raps. When he opened the door, he froze. Avery stood there, wind-swept and breathless, her coat clutched tightly around her. Her eyes, always composed, now shimmered under the flickering hallway light. I didn't know where else to go, she said simply. He stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as though afraid her presence might fracture the space. Gabe closed the door behind her and watched as she looked around the apartment, bare walls, second-hand furniture, the warmth of a home held together by love and paper napkin drawings. This is where you live, she murmured. This is where we stay, he corrected softly. Avery turned to him, arms folded. I didn't want that dinner to turn into whatever the press made it. I know. I should have protected you. Gabe shook his head. You gave Ellie a night she'll never forget. That matters more. She sat down on the edge of the armchair, her posture collapsing slightly as though the weight she carried had finally outlasted her spine. I built my whole life on control, Gabe. Every meeting, every message, every moment scheduled and bulletproof. But ever since you 2 walked in, it's like, you're breathing, he offered. She laughed quietly. More like I've been holding my breath for years and just noticed how quiet the world got. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I never meant to complicate things for you, he said. You're a CEO. You answer to people who don't care about stories like ours. Avery looked at him, her voice a thread of something raw. But I do. Gabe didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he glanced toward the couch. Ellie had shifted her hand, tucked under her cheek, her drawing still clutched in her fingers. A new one, 3 capes, this time, not 2. I wanted to protect her from everything he said quietly. The grief, the fear, the world getting colder every year. But she sees through walls. She saw something in you before I did. Avery stood again walking to the window. Her reflection caught against the city lights. For the first time, she didn't look like a mogul. She looked like a woman trying to find the pieces of herself in a life too polished to feel real. "She reminds me of me," Avery whispered. "Not the version I show to the world, the one I forgot how to be." Gabe stepped forward slower now, like the moment deserved silence more than sound. "You came here tonight," he said, "not because you had to, but because you didn't want to be alone." She met his gaze. "Is that selfish?" "No," he said, "it's brave." They stood there in the quiet for a long time. Then Avery looked down at Ellie and her voice changed. "I didn't just come for you, I came for her too. I can't make the world easier for her, but I can be part of the reason it doesn't crush her spirit." Gabe swallowed hard, and for the first time he let himself believe that maybe he wasn't alone in this anymore. When Avery left later that night, she didn't take the elevator. She took the stairs, step by step shedding the weight of everything she thought she had to be. She paused halfway down, took out her phone, and did something she hadn't done in years. She cleared her calendar. The next morning, she walked into her office before sunrise and called her communications director. "No interviews, no statements, no spin," she said firmly. "But Miss Crudowislone." "Make it stop," she said. "If they want a story, they can wait for the ending." Then she picked up Ellie's crayon drawing still on her desk where she'd left it the night of the dinner, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that came from PR wins or stock spikes, but the kind that came from choosing to stay, choosing to care, and letting go of who the world told you to be, just long enough to become someone worth being. The pediatric ER was warmer than Gabe expected, bright too, with murals of cartoon animals and balloon decals peeling slightly at the corners. But none of that warmth could reach him, where he sat hunched over a stiff plastic chair, his hands locked around Ellie's backpack. She was inside, fevered, pale, listless in a way that wasn't like her. She just laid down and didn't get back up, Gabe had told the nurse in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. They'd taken her in immediately, asking for insurance information he didn't have, speaking in clipped, efficient tones Gabe couldn't process. He'd signed whatever they put in front of him. Then they'd asked him to wait. So he did, and waited, and hoped. The door beside him creaked open. He looked up, startled. Avery Sloane stepped into the hallway. She was wearing jeans and a blazer over a t-shirt. No makeup, hair pulled into a low ponytail. She looked less like the CEO of a billion-dollar empire and more like someone who had run out the door without thinking twice. "Where is she?" she asked. Gabe rose slowly. "They're running tests." "Flu, strep dehydration, I called in a pediatric specialist," she interrupted. "Someone I trust. He's on his way." He blinked. "You..." "What?" She took a breath. "You don't have insurance. You didn't ask me for help." But I read between the lines. Gabe sank back into the chair, exhaustion crashing over him. "I didn't want you to think I was using you." Avery sat beside him, her voice low. "Then you don't know me at all." He turned to her, the fight draining out of his shoulders. "I can't lose her. I don't know what I'd be without her." "You'd still be her father," Avery said, "and she would still know that she's loved. That matters more than anything." They sat in silence. Then the door opened again. A nurse stepped out and smiled. "She's stable. Fever's down. You can come in." Gabe shot to his feet, then paused. "You want to..." Avery nodded. "Yes." Ellie lay beneath a thin blanket, her cheeks flushed but no longer ghost pale. Her eyes fluttered open when Gabe knelt beside her bed. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered, brushing her hair off her forehead. She blinked slowly. "You brought her," she murmured. Avery leaned in. "Hey, hero." Ellie gave a tired, crooked smile. "I'm still your intern, right?" Avery laughed softly. "You're promoted." Ellie's fingers found Gabe's clutching tight. "I'm okay now," she whispered. "You can stop worrying." But he couldn't. Not yet. Hours passed in a soft blur. Doctors came and went, checking vitals, adjusting meds, leaving behind charts and silent glances that spoke of cautious optimism. Gabe sat unmoving beside the bed, watching the slow rhythm of Ellie's chest rise and fall. Avery never left the room. She stood near the window at first, then eventually pulled a chair close to Gabe's. There was no separation now, not between them, not between her and Ellie, not between who they'd been and who they were becoming. Gabe leaned back, voice barely above a breath. "You didn't have to come." "I know," she replied. "That's why I did." He looked at her, then really looked, and in that moment something shifted, not grand or explosive, but quiet and irreversible. A knowing, a recognition. This woman had shown up when the rest of the world had disappeared. Later, when Ellie was asleep again, Avery stepped into the hallway to make a call. Rachel picked up on the second ring. "You're still at the hospital?" "I am," Avery said. "I need HR to begin enrollment paperwork for Gabe, immediate benefits. I want him moved to full-time. He's not on contract. He is now." Rachel hesitated. "You're crossing lines, Avery." "No," she replied. "I'm removing one." By the time Avery returned, Gabe was sitting beside Ellie with her sketchbook in hand. He looked up as she entered. "She fell asleep mid-sentence," he said softly. "Was halfway through telling me how you should wear purple more often." Avery chuckled. "She's got strong opinions." "She gets that from her mother," Gabe murmured. "But the bravery, that's hers alone." Avery pulled the chair closer again, her eyes never leaving his. "You once asked me who shows up for me," she said. "The truth is, I haven't let anyone try." And now a beat past, then another. "Now I want to learn." Gabe nodded slowly. "That's all it takes, you know. The willingness." She looked down at Ellie, then back at him. "I think you both showed me how." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't need to say out loud anymore. Then Avery stood and reached into her bag. She pulled out Ellie's napkin, drawing the one with the 3 caped figures. "I keep it on my desk," she said. "Every meeting, every day, just in case I forget what matters." Gabe swallowed the lump in his throat. "You never forget. You just need someone brave enough to remind you." She nodded, pressing the napkin to her heart. "Well then, I've been reminded." And in the quiet of that hospital room, something bigger than fear settled between them. Hope, not as a vague promise, but as a choice. One they were finally ready to make together. The boardroom on the 43rd floor was always kept a few degrees colder than necessary, the temperature intentionally calculated to sharpen focus and shorten arguments. Gabe stood at the far end of the long obsidian table, shoulders, squared palms resting lightly against the edge of a sleek presentation screen. He was no longer wearing a tool belt or carrying wires. Today, he wore a charcoal gray shirt, tucked into pressed slacks, a loaner from Wallace who insisted he looked like someone they'd listened to. Across from him sat the senior systems team, 7 engineers, 2 consultants, and 1 executive vice president whose jaw had been tightening for the last 15 minutes. Avery Sloan was not present. Not yet. And that more than anything made Gabe's skin crawl. "Your recalibration suggestions are ambitious," said the EVP, a lean man named Harrow with a tie too tight and a smile that never touched his eyes. "But you've skipped protocol. You're not part of this team. You're not even part of this division." Gabe kept his voice level. "I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I saw inefficiencies, some of them critical. I ran a simulation. That's all." Harrow tapped a pen against the table. "And in doing so, you accessed system-level diagnostics that were never authorized. There, it was the angle of attack." Gabe's stomach coiled, but he didn't flinch. "Everything I did was in the interest of preventing system failure." That HVAC feedback loop on sub-level 4. It was 5 days from causing a cascade. I didn't guess. I measured. Harrow opened his mouth again, but before the words could leave, the doors swept open. Avery walked in calm and unhurried, a black blazer over a soft cream blouse. The room shifted. Conversations cut off. Eyes snapped forward. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood beside Gabe. Mr. Klein's access was authorized, she said without preamble. By me. Harrow's face paled slightly, but his tone remained formal. That wasn't communicated through protocol. Neither was his solution, Avery replied. Which, by the way, just saved this company an estimated $640,000 in projected downtime and energy waste. Someone in the room coughed. Another adjusted their glasses. Harrow blinked. Avery looked at Gabe not with condescension or control, but with trust. I asked him here today because I want you all to understand something, she continued. Innovation doesn't always come from titles. Sometimes it comes from someone who still remembers what it means to build from the ground up. She paused, letting the words sink in. Effective immediately, Gabe Klein is being promoted to lead systems analyst for Sloan Corp Infrastructure Division. He will report directly to me. Murmurs flared across the table. One consultant raised a cautious hand. Forgive me, but does this mean he's managing the team? No, Avery said, her voice crisp. It means the team is about to learn from someone who's already been where our technology needs to go. Gabe felt his breath catch, not from the recognition but from the weight of it. The responsibility. The second chance he hadn't dared hope for. He turned to Avery, his voice low. You didn't have to do that. She smiled, small but steady. I didn't have to. I wanted to. After the meeting, Gabe stepped out onto the open-air terrace 2 floors below, letting the wind rush against his skin. His hands trembled as he exhaled. The door clicked open behind him. He didn't turn, but he knew the footsteps. Avery leaned against the railing beside him, arms crossed. You did well in there, she said. I didn't feel like it. Doesn't matter. You showed up. He looked over at her, searching for the edge in her voice, but found none. Just sincerity. You really think I can do this? He asked. Avery nodded. You're already doing it. There was a long silence. Then Gabe said, I've been offered promotions before. Contracts. Better pay. But I always felt like I was just trading one version of exhaustion for another. And now he turned to face her fully. Now it feels like I'm walking into something that actually means something. Not just for me. For Ellie. For the people I work with. Even for you. Avery met his gaze. There was a softness there he hadn't seen before. A quiet unveiling. I'm not good at letting people in, she said. But you didn't wait for an invitation. You just showed up, again and again. He took a step closer. Because I see you. Not just the CEO. The woman who sits in hospitals without needing to be asked. The one who calls doctors at midnight because a little girl matters more than public relations. Avery blinked, her voice barely a whisper. That night changed everything for me. For me, too, he said. They stood close now, shoulder to shoulder, hearts not touching, but undeniably aware of each other. You know what Ellie said last night, Gabe continued. She said you were already part of the family. She drew a house with a room just for you. Purple curtains. Avery laughed, but it caught on something deep. I've never had purple curtains. You will, Gabe said, if you want them. Another silence. Then she looked at him, eyes steady. Is this your way of proposing something? Gabe smiled. Maybe. But there's no ring. Not yet. Then what is it? A promise, he said, to keep showing up, even on the days when it's hard. Especially then. Avery's breath hitched. She reached out and took his hand. And, for the first time, neither of them needed to say the words out loud. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Of a new kind of partnership. Of a team neither had known they needed. Of love, not the kind that starts with fireworks, but the kind that grows from steady hands and soft, unwavering truth. And under the wind of a city that had never once paused for either of them. They stood still. Together. The call came on a rainy Wednesday. Gabe had just picked Ellie up from school and was helping her make grilled cheese in the tiny kitchen when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He nearly ignored it, his attention fixed on Ellie's careful slicing of strawberries into heart shapes. But something in his gut told him to answer. Mr. Klein said, the voice on the line clipped and efficient. "This is Janet Boone, from Sloan Corp Legal Affairs. I'm afraid there's an issue that's come up regarding your recent promotion." Gabe's heart dropped. "I'm listening." "There's been a formal complaint filed by a member of the executive board," she continued. "They're alleging a breach of internal hiring protocol citing favoritism and unauthorized access to proprietary data." Gabe gripped the edge of the countertop, his knuckles white. "That's not true. Ms. Quarry, Ms. Sloan approved everything." "Yes, we're aware. However, internal policy requires us to investigate any grievance raised by a board member, and in the meantime, you'll be placed on temporary suspension with pay pending review. Please return your badge tomorrow." Avery didn't find out until the next morning. She was in the middle of a strategy session when Rachel slid a manila folder onto the table and leaned in with a hushed urgency. "Someone went behind your back," Rachel said. "Filed a complaint about Gabe's appointment." Avery's face hardened. "Who, Harrow?" He submitted a 6-page memo claiming you circumvented protocol and pushed through a promotion for someone personally connected to you. The blood in Avery's veins ran ice cold. What about the systems data, the efficiency reports, the disaster he prevented, buried under language about process violations and favoritism? Avery stood from the table, ignoring the questioning looks from her team. "Clear my afternoon, and get me security footage from the ops wing for the last 2 weeks." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You think it was more than just a memo. I think someone's afraid of being outperformed." That night, Gabe packed his tools into a canvas bag with quiet resignation. Ellie sat on the couch with her knees tucked to her chest, watching him. "They're taking it back, aren't they?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he zipped the bag closed and turned to her. "It's just for now. They have rules, and someone twisted the rules to make it look like we broke them." Her eyes welled with tears. "But you didn't." "No," he said, "but not everyone plays fair." Ellie was silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, she slipped off the couch and disappeared into the bedroom. Gabe sighed and slumped into the chair, the silence of the room pressing down on his shoulders like weight he'd carried too many times before. A few minutes later, Ellie returned holding something in both hands, a small pink unicorn notebook. "I have something," she said, holding it out. "I didn't know if it mattered, but I think maybe it does now." He took it gently and opened to the page she pointed at. A printed, still image. Grainy, but clear enough. A man in a gray suit, Harrow standing outside the server room with another staff member holding what appeared to be a USB drive. The timestamp matched the day Gabe's diagnostic files had mysteriously leaked without his knowledge. Gabe stared at it, stunned. "Where did you get this?" "I borrowed your laptop once," Ellie said quietly, "when you were asleep. I wanted to make a slideshow of your first day at work, like for a memory book, but I saw the building camera folder was open and I got curious." He exhaled a breath that was part disbelief, part awe. "You might have just saved my job." Ellie shrugged. "You said we're a team." Avery stared at the footage on her office screen in stunned silence. She had spent the last 6 hours combing through access logs, door records, and complaint memos, but it was Ellie's screenshot that finally brought everything into focus. She turned to Rachel. "Draft a formal response. Include the footage and the access timestamps. Submit it directly to the board ethics committee." Rachel nodded. What about Harrow? Avery's voice was sharp but calm. "Suspend him. Effective immediately." When Gabe returned to the building the next morning, it was Avery herself waiting at the security desk. She handed him a new badge pressed into his palm with quiet finality. "You're reinstated," she said. "Fully. And Harrow has been placed on leave pending review." He stared at her. "How?" "Ellie," she said simply. She found the truth. You raised a detective." Gabe laughed, the sound shaky and full of something bigger than relief. "I don't know what to say." Avery stepped closer, her voice soft. "Say you'll come back." He looked down at the badge, then up at her. "I never really left." That evening, Avery visited their apartment for the first time since that night in the rain. Ellie opened the door, already wearing her meeting someone important dress. She held out a cookie in one hand and a new drawing in the other. This time, the drawing had 4 people: Ellie, Gabe, Avery, and someone new, a figure in a gray suit walking away, a sign in the background that said, "Don't be mean." Avery laughed and crouched beside her. "Did you draw that today?" Ellie nodded. "It's called Justice. I asked the teacher how to spell it." Avery's eyes shimmered. "You spelled it perfectly." She looked up at Gabe, then who leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "We're good, because you didn't back down." Avery stepped inside, her voice steady but full of warmth. "None of this happened because I stood up. It happened because Ellie did, and because you didn't run when it would have been easier." He looked at her, heart full. And somewhere between truth, consequence, and crayons they found something stronger than vindication. They found a bond neither sabotage nor fear could undo, because what had started with a folded resume had become a life they were now building together. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 25th floor of the Sloan Residence's Avery's personally designed apartment complex, nestled beside the city's botanical gardens. The air inside the building was different than anywhere Gabe had lived. Warm, clean, quiet. Not sterile, not cold. Just peaceful. He stepped out with Ellie holding his hand, her eyes wide with the kind of reverence she usually reserved for libraries and amusement parks. "Are we really allowed to be here?" she whispered. Gabe smiled, still not entirely believing it himself. Avery said, "It's temporary. Until things settle. Until we figure out what comes next." Ellie tilted her head. "I thought we were already figuring it out." They turned the corner and found Avery waiting outside a door marked 2504, holding a keycard and a clipboard. She wasn't in her usual CEO attire. No heels, no blazer, just jeans, a soft blouse, and a light nervousness dancing in her eyes. "I know it's a bit of a leap," she said, handing Gabe the keycard. "But I had the unit refreshed, new sheets, groceries stocked, and there's a corner by the window I thought might work well for Ellie's drawing table." Gabe took the card slowly. "You did all that. I used to think homes were built with concrete and contracts," Avery said. "Turns out sometimes they start with a promise and a crayon drawing." Ellie tugged Gabe's hand. "Can we see it?" He looked at Avery. She nodded once. Inside, the apartment smelled of lemon oil and something faintly floral. The floors were light oak, the kitchen sleek and modern but inviting. Big windows lined the far wall, and sure enough in the corner stood a small white desk with colored pencils already arranged in jars. Ellie gasped and ran to it, dropping her backpack with a thunk. "There's even purple curtains," she shouted. She remembered Gabe turned to Avery, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." She looked up at him, her voice quieter. "Say you'll stay as long as you need." He hesitated. "Then I need longer than I want to admit." Her eyes softened. "Then it's yours." Later that evening, after Ellie had finished drawing her official first meal here, sketch 3 stick figures eating grilled cheese at a sunlit table, Avery offered to take them both to the garden terrace. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting amber light across the skyline. Ellie skipped ahead toward the fountain, chasing the breeze, while Gabe and Avery walked slowly behind. "This doesn't feel like a favor," he said after a while. "It feels like a turning point." Avery folded her arms, watching Ellie laugh as she splashed her fingers in the water. "That's because it is. For all of us." He turned to her. "You don't usually let people into your life like this." "I know that." She nodded, lips tight. "It's easier to manage the narrative when no one's too close." And now Avery exhaled. "Now I'm realizing closeness doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you accountable to something bigger than yourself." He smiled gently. "She changed you." She changed both of us, Avery replied, looking at Ellie. She's the kind of reminder I didn't know I needed. They stood there for a moment, watching the little girl who had stitched their two lives together without even realizing it. Then Avery said something so soft, so unguarded, it caught him off balance. "Do you think she'll ever feel like this is her real home?" Gabe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to where Ellie stood and crouched beside her. "Hey, Elle, he asked if we stayed here a while longer. Then a while, even would you be okay with that?" Ellie tilted her head, thoughtful. "Do we get to eat together every night?" "Yes. And can I draw on the fridge? We'll check with management." She grinned. "Then it's already home." Avery smiled, blinking fast as if the wind had caught her eyes the wrong way. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed in her new room, her walls already pinned with taped-up drawings, Avery lingered in the living room with Gabe. The apartment was quiet but alive. It felt lived in. She reached for her bag and pulled something out, a framed sketch Ellie had given her days earlier. 3 figures again, this time under a banner that read, "We fix things together." Avery placed the frame on the bookshelf. "I was wrong," she said softly. "About what?" "About where strength comes from. I thought it was control, strategy, isolation. But it's this: showing up, saying yes to people who need you, letting them need you back." Gabe stepped closer, his voice full of something unsaid for too long. "You don't have to keep holding everything alone." She looked up at him. "Neither do you." They stood there, inches apart, the silence not empty but full of every moment they'd walked through, every wall they'd quietly dismantled. And then, slowly, she reached for his hand. No grand declaration, no romantic fanfare. Just 2 people standing in the middle of a borrowed apartment, finally letting the idea of family stretch enough to hold them both. Because sometimes you don't find home. Sometimes home finds you. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when the 3 of them stepped into Lincoln Park. The late autumn breeze carried a soft chill, but the kind that brought people closer, not apart. Avery held Ellie's mittened hand as they walked past tall oaks shedding the last of their leaves. Gabe carried a paper bag filled with sandwiches and thermoses of hot cocoa, a quiet picnic Ellie's idea. "It's called Celebration Night," Ellie explained on the way, "because we're all finally in the same place at the same time. And happy." Gabe had looked at Avery then, uncertain if she was just humoring his daughter. But the warmth in her smile wasn't something you could fake. Now, under the golden glow of the park's lampposts, Ellie ran ahead toward a bench near the fountain. She laid out a scarf like a tablecloth and carefully began unpacking her portion of the picnic with a level of seriousness reserved for astronauts or wedding planners. Avery watched her, amused. "She takes joy seriously." Gabe nodded. "She's her mother's child." A moment of silence passed between them, not awkward, but reverent. "She would have liked you," Gabe added quietly. Avery looked over. "Your wife." He nodded. "She'd have seen the fire in you, and she'd have told me not to screw it up." Avery's expression softened. "She sounds wise." She was, and wild, and warm. Losing her, it tore everything loose inside me. I didn't just lose a partner, I lost direction. Ellie kept me moving, but I wasn't living. Not really. He looked down as if the leaves at his feet held the memory of that pain. "And now," Avery asked gently. He turned toward her. "Now I'm scared again. But not of losing. I'm scared of wanting." The confession hit harder than he expected, but Avery didn't look away. "You're not the only one," she whispered. They watched Ellie dance in the distance, her arms outstretched, her scarf billowing behind her like a cape. "She thinks we're already a family," Avery said. Is she wrong? Avery didn't answer at first. Instead, she walked a few steps ahead and looked up at the sky, the stars beginning to blink into life above the trees. When she turned back, something unguarded had opened in her expression. "My mother once told me that love makes people reckless, that it clouds your judgment and turns you soft. She meant it as a warning. I lived by it for years. She paused. But I've never felt clearer than I do when I'm near you. Gabe stepped closer, slow and deliberate. I don't need you to fix anything, he said. I just want you here when the days are easy and when they're not. Their eyes locked, and for a long moment the park around them fell away. No past, no future, just this moment, honest, fragile, alive. And then Gabe reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair behind Avery's ear. She leaned into the touch without hesitation. When their lips met, it wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It was soft, grounded. A kiss that said, I see you. I'm staying. I'm not afraid anymore. It lasted just long enough for Ellie's gasp to echo across the lawn. She stood a few feet away, wide-eyed and beaming. Finally, she declared, dropping her sandwich and clapping both hands together like she'd just seen fireworks. Avery laughed into Gabe's shoulder, her face flushed. Well, I guess we're not subtle. Ellie skipped toward them and wrapped her arms around both. Does this mean I can call her almost Mom? Or is that weird? Gabe chuckled, kneeling. Let's stick with Avery for now. Fine, Ellie said dramatically. But you both need matching pajamas if this is going to be official. Avery tilted her head. That's your metric for family. Ellie shrugged. That and Saturday pancakes. They spent the rest of the evening watching Ellie build leaf piles and make declarations about things she would do when she was grown, like run a company where everyone could bring their pets and their feelings. As they walked back toward the car, Gabe reached for Avery's hand and held it in full view of the world. No more hiding. No more pretending they were something less than everything. That night, after Ellie had gone to sleep, curled against her stuffed unicorn in her new room, Gabe and Avery stood on the apartment balcony. The city glowed beneath them, but neither looked out. They looked at each other. I used to measure my life by achievements, Avery said. Deadlines, deals, projections, but none of that made me feel safe. Not like this. Gabe stepped closer. You're safe here. Her voice wavered. So are you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper, Ellie's original resume, for him. The one that had started it all. He unfolded it, revealing the uneven letters and smudged stars. I can clean. I'm quiet. I don't cry in front of people. I can help. I can learn. Please. Gabe's throat tightened. This was a cry for hope. From her. From me. He looked at Avery. And you answered. Avery took the paper, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, She wasn't the only one. Then she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. And in that quiet above a city that had once made them feel small, they stood steady, no longer alone, no longer waiting. Because when love finds you not in perfection, but in perseverance, you don't need vows. You just need someone who stays. The conference room was filled with sunlight the next morning, spilling across the glass walls and polished floor like a quiet promise. The space, usually so stark and intimidating, felt different today, warmer, more human. Avery sat at the head of the long oak table, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in a soft cream blouse and a quiet steadiness that made her seem both powerful and entirely at peace. Next to her, Gabe adjusted his tie, clearly borrowed, clearly uncomfortable. Across from them, seated in neat rows, were the senior board members of the Sloan Foundation and the company's executive council people, who for years had looked at Avery and seen only strategy, efficiency, control. They had no idea what was coming. Avery stood, let the silence settle, then spoke. Before we begin, I'd like to share a story, not from a quarterly report and not from our legal team, from my life. A pause. No one moved. Months ago, a single father walked into this building with a resume in his hand. Not for himself, but for his daughter. She was 8. Her resume said she could clean quietly, she didn't cry much, and that she could learn. It said, please. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Avery glanced at Gabe, who held her gaze with quiet strength. That piece of paper cracked something open in me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. It meant someone believed she was worth showing up for even if the world hadn't yet shown up for them. She took a breath. Since then, I've come to believe that leadership isn't just what happens in this room. It's what happens when no one's watching when we decide to care, even when it costs us. Especially when it costs us. Avery lifted a folder from the table and slid it forward. Today, I'm proposing a new initiative, the Worth Project. A program dedicated to supporting single parents, caregivers, and displaced families through education grants, housing stipends, and job placement. It starts with 10 families in this city. I hope it ends with hundreds more. The boardroom was quiet. Then an older man with silver-rimmed glasses leaned forward. Is this personal for you, Miss Sloan? She didn't flinch. It's human. Later that afternoon, as the three of them strolled through the park, Avery barefoot in the grass for the first time in years, Ellie skipped ahead chasing pigeons with shrieks of laughter. You were incredible today, Gabe said. Avery smiled, her hand brushing his. I just told the truth. No, he said. You told our truth. She turned to him, emotions pooling behind her eyes. It took me so long to stop thinking that strength meant standing alone. Gabe leaned in, brushing his forehead against hers. Now you're surrounded. She closed her eyes and whispered, and finally home. Weeks passed. The apartment no longer felt borrowed, it felt lived in. The fridge had Ellie's newest drawings, and the living room had a permanent dent where the three of them piled onto the couch each Friday for movie night. Ellie had discovered an obsession with 80s music and insisted Gabe learn every lyric to Take on Me. He did. Badly. One Sunday morning, while pancakes sizzled in the background, Ellie sat at the table with a new drawing. It was simpler than her usual work, no unicorns or flying dolphins. Just 3 figures holding hands under a banner that read, I knew you'd stay. Gabe looked over her shoulder and gently rested his hand on hers. Who's it for? He asked. Ellie looked up, grinning. Us. But I want to give it to her, because even when she didn't know it, she was already part of our family. That afternoon, Ellie stood in the same lobby where it had all begun. Same security desk. Same marble floors. But this time she wasn't holding a folded resume. She was holding a frame. Avery crouched beside her. This is for you, Ellie said, placing the drawing in her hands. It's the final version. I'm not editing anymore. Avery blinked back tears. Why now? Ellie shrugged. Because we're done applying. You're already hired. Avery burst into laughter and pulled her into a hug. Gabe watched Heartful Soul steady. And just like that, what began as a desperate plea in a quiet child's handwriting had become something far bigger. A home. A partnership. A love not built from perfection, but from showing up again and again, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That evening, with the city glowing outside their window and the world feeling wide open, Avery curled up beside Gabe on the balcony, a blanket around them both. Ellie was asleep, her stuffed unicorn tucked under her chin. Do you remember what she wrote? Avery asked softly. The first line, Gabe nodded. I can clean. I'm quiet. No, Avery whispered. The last part. The one that broke me. She leaned into him. Please. He wrapped his arm around her. She doesn't have to say please anymore, he said. None of us do, Avery murmured. We're already chosen. And in that stillness where 2 broken paths had joined to become something whole, something healed, they sat quietly holding not just each other but everything they'd built. A life, a home, and a love story that began with a sentence, and never really ended.